Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Law and Finance Show, and today we have another great guest on. Now, this guest is in the legal space, but not necessarily as a lawyer, but in the technology space, because there are a lot of opportunities when it comes down to technology in the legal space. So, we're definitely going to talk about that. And I'm also pretty excited because, she is definitely active as a philanthropist, doing great things in that space. So, stay tuned for today's episode. So, without further ado, let me bring on my guest for today. Melissa, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, Terrell. Thank you for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
I am great. I am great. I will say, what's been interesting is at the time we were filming this is the day after Valentine's Day.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if it's just because of like the Super Bowl and I stayed up late on Sunday, but it just felt like Monday moved a lot slower than I
It
expected.
was slow. It was slow for me too. It was slow for me too. It's like a very Monday Tuesday today. So, but we're gonna make it through.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I am glad you are doing well, and I'm glad that you're on the show. And one of the things that I find very interesting is, as I start to work with more law firms and get
Mhm.
deeper into the legal space, that I'm starting to recognize that there is a phenomenal opportunity in when it comes down to technology in the legal space because I was working with one client of mine and we were
Mhm.
trying to get their settlement agreements and they're like, "Oh, I'm going to have to get my assistant to scan all those to you like for
Yep.
the last 2 years because all of them are hard copy." So I'm just
Yeah.
like, "Oh, okay."
Well, it's an interesting thing, Terrell, because it's not that there is necessarily a lack of innovation in the legal tech space. It is happening. It's just that lawyers by and large have been a little bit more hesitant to adopt and sort of innovate in the way that they've been doing their work. The status quo is legal tech's biggest competition if you're thinking about coming into the space. And so figuring out how to make people or really inspire people to do their work differently is what we're super excited about doing at Fourth Party in particular.
Nice, nice. I love it. I love it. Now, before we jump into the details of Fourth Party,
Mhm.
can you just share with us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I consider myself in the early stages of my second career. My first career was as a nonprofit fundraising professional, and most of that was in Georgia. And so really was really lucky to work with a number of organizations, schools, and at all level of the education system, as well as small nonprofits who provided human services support, whether that's for people experiencing homelessness or other sort of societal challenges. And so, as a part of that work, I was a grant writer and a fundraiser, and got to be a part of putting $10 million of support into communities in need in the state of Georgia. So that was a really great experience and a ton of great relationships that I continue to be connected to that allow me to, express my philanthropic spirit. But now I find myself in the sort of technology legal space. And that has been, I think, benefited from my work as a nonprofit professional, particularly because, you learn to do a lot more with less. And so being able to kind of have that lean mindset and a little bit of reckless optimism has really benefited me at this stage.
Now, it's interesting that you bring that up about the reckless optimism because one of the things that I was talking to someone about was, when you're building your business, there's like this extraordinary amount of optimism,
Mhm,
yet
mhm.
sense of reality that you have to where it just seems like it seems like it is very contradicting at times. So I'm curious as to how do you balance the optimism for what this could be versus the reality of, hey, what do we need to actually go execute on?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we pride ourselves on being really invested in the feedback. So even though it's can be painful to receive, um, listening really well to what people are saying to you, particularly when you're moving into a space. For our case, my co-founder and I do not have technical backgrounds, and so moving into this space, you really have to be hyper invested in what are people saying, what are the real pain points, and how am I responding to them. And so that tempers some of that optimism pretty regularly. But then there also has to be the belief that I can turn this feedback into something useful. And so not sort of hearing it as criticisms or just, people aren't going to get it. You're innovating, right? Like you're here to get their responses and their honest thoughts. They really are, treasure for us, an early stage startup like we are. But it's figuring out how to sort of turn that into something useful for yourself and incorporate that into the decision making that you have. It really doesn't affect sort of your spirit or like how you believe in the product, but it should inform your decision making and really kind of give you a guidepost for how to get things done.
Awesome, man. Now you mentioned that you don't have you nor your founder have a technical background. Now,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
seems to be, I would say, I'm located in Charlotte, North Carolina,
Uh-huh.
and there are quite a few tech companies that are developing. And one of the things that comes up in question is that, do you have to have a technical background? Or like people say, well, I don't know if I can start a tech company. I'm not a developer. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
what was it that made you guys a little bit more comfortable that you could say, you know what, we don't have a technical background, but we can build a tech business?
Yeah, well, we are entrepreneurs. My husband and I were co-founders at Fourth Party, and he's an attorney. And so we have been working together in his law firm for a few years, and sort of, had the experience of having this very specific pain point. But when we thought about, what kind of businesses we wanted to get into, we went for the ones that seemed really cool and fun that we didn't have any background in. And when we got feedback from other folks as we kind of shopped around these ideas, people who, have been more successful or already had, established record of success with building businesses, they really pushed us to say, what's your pain? Like, I understand that this is a really cool idea, but like, what unique perspective do you bring to solve that problem? And so what's the opportunity that we kind of fell in our laps a little bit around Fourth Party is that, this was a challenge that Gino was experiencing every day. And that's not something that you can kind of learn in school. That experience of understanding that challenge and all of the nuances that go into how you sort of do a certain task in your work, that's something very unique. And, you can't find that at, a business school. And so it's really understanding that problem and how well you understand the problem that you're trying to solve, and then finding the people who can get it done. So it's like the a book I've recently read, Who Not How. Like, it's really not about what you bring to the table in the sense of those specific skill sets around areas that you didn't study in school. It's really, can you lead a team around a concept, around solving a problem that you know really, really well. And so that's how we've kind of approached building our organization. We have team members all across the country who, are the experts. It's what they do. And it's like figuring out how to not be worried about what you don't know how to do, but finding the person who does it well, is how people are able to kind of jump into these new spaces. And it's really allowing a lot more opportunity for inclusion.
Gotcha, gotcha. I'm very curious now. I have a hypothesis,
Okay.
and so I'm gonna ask a question. Like,
Okay.
to me, that seems like I very well resonate with that perspective on being able to focus on, like, hey, how do you lead and get the best out of the team? Now, I would say is prior to your professional career, had you ever like where did you develop that team mentality and that ability to be able to lower your ego to really see the value in others?
So the first place that I learned that was I was raised by my great grandmother, and so I grew up in California, but she was Southern, and so I feel like I had a Southern upbringing in some ways, and so learning to be a part of a family and contribute and sort of know your role, that's something that is hard coded right from my youth. But and she was one of the first entrepreneurs that I ever got to observe, and so seeing her sort of reinvent herself through entrepreneurship was something that is just something that I treasure. But I had some humbling experiences from my employment background. I went from, I went and got a graduate degree and went into a manager's role, and I was horrible at it. And bless them, any of my old, staff that was supporting me. And so I found myself going from a manager role into an assistant role. And you have to really figure out how to, work with a team, do a lot of work without getting a whole lot of credit, figuring out how to sort of remove roadblocks so that your leader can be successful. And that experience in particular, that humble pie, but also that really practical sort of like teamwork experience was critical for me to figure out what kind of leader I wanted to be.
Gotcha, gotcha. Awesome. I love it. I would say my hypothesis was, I was like, I wonder if she played sports at some point.
No, not the sports one, no.
But I love it because I do think that that is something that in all of the interviews that we've done, the Law and Finance Show is part of the Business Talk Library
Mhm.
media company, and I host several shows under the Business Talk Library, and I've done what over 400 interviews in the last 2 years, and something that I find to be very common about business owners that are successful are people that figured out how to focus less on the technical skill and focus more on what problem am I solving
Yeah.
and how do we get laser focused on solving the problem for our customer or for our paying customers
Mhm.
as opposed to just trying to express our own creativity.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard when you've been successful in a space and you're a doer and you have that passion that drives you to, get it done against all odds. But that not isn't necessarily the skill set that's going to actually like drive you to get more done. It's grit and it's important. But figuring out what you don't do well and inviting the person in that does it well, I mean, that has saved us a lot of headaches.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. So I want to talk a little bit more about fourth party and
Yeah.
just, what is the solution that it brings to your customers?
Yeah. So for folks who, like me, don't have a legal background, you may have found yourself in some kind of conflict, unfortunately, whether that's divorce or a dispute about a car accident. Sometimes it could just be something as simple as a tenant landlord argument. But when you find yourself in those kinds of situations, those are considered civil disputes, and they're usually handled by a middleman, what I like to call the peacemakers. They're usually mediators or arbitrators who come to the table and sort of help each conflicting side speak their piece and try to find some middle ground. And when that happens, that usually doesn't happen in a courtroom, although most people think of their sort of lawsuits happening in the court of law. It usually happens in a conference room with, that middle person. And that person, like you said, is usually sort of armed with a legal pad and a pen. And that is the majority of how they approach that work. And it is complicated work, complex work. And they've done a lot more with less for a really long time. And so fourth party is really providing that person, that mediator, that negotiator with a digital workspace to get their job done. And so we provide them with all the tools to help them with all the tasks that they really kind of hate, just kind of get those tasks done a little bit easier. Note taking, calendaring, document storage, and invoicing are the main areas that we try to provide a modern solution for that legacy problem, system problem that they're experiencing.
Nice, nice. So I guess if we talk a little bit about, for a mediator now, without the technology, what does that world look like for them without this technology?
Yeah, it's pretty low tech. I mean, I think that what the pandemic did was exacerbate an existing challenge. So, our work is not accessible remotely when we don't have sort of those digital supports in place. And I think, we were talking about sort of the lack of tech in legal when you think about, when you interact with a lawyer, that it's not usually as super high tech. It's really that they are finding themselves at a place of there's increased education about the need for virtual supports because of the pandemic. It forced us into it, right? But their frustration is also just as high because it's hard to start using these new systems, and they're not always built for the people who are going to be using them. And so one of the things that we're super focused on is really making sure that our platform supports mediators, whether they're in the early stage of their career or that they've, pretty seasoned and have been doing this for a while. So on our platform, our users range from age 35 to 80. Our average age of our user is 60, which means that they may have some background in using technology, but most often they've been practicing probably about 30 years. And so that, process of using a legal pad and pen is pretty, hard coded. So we really try to be compassionate as we think about how we design our technology so that it's responsive to someone who has a lot of experience, or maybe this may be the first time that they are considering using a CRM at they're already 30 years into their career.
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah, no, I definitely see that trend, moving upward more and more in the legal industry as they're starting to adopt and I think see the need for the technology more and more.
Uh-huh.
So I definitely see that. So what has been the reception of customers as they kind of had experience with the technology and the app solution that you guys provide?
Yeah, so we launched in 2020 and have been working with a pilot customer here in the Southeast with mediators across 7 states, which has been really interesting just to get the different perspectives that folks have. I think that the biggest challenge that people experience, mediators experience when they're doing their work is around bookings and then payments, right? It's like getting them business in and then getting paid for the work that you've done. And so a lot of really positive feedback around that calendar management, especially because, it's more nuanced now. It used to just be, I'm going to meet you at my conference room. Well, now that meeting might be on Zoom. It might be a hybrid. It may be in person. And so we want to help people avoid sort of getting in their car, driving up to the office, and then finding out it's a Zoom meeting. And so that's that pain point that we've been able to really focus in on right now. And then our next stage is to focus in on that billing part of the process, because it is really complex. For mediators, everything is negotiable, even their sort of rates, or rate of billing terms, I should say. And so when it's time for invoicing, that's another place where, it's not a fun task. And we really, again, want to dial in on those things that they hate, right? And make them a little bit better, or hopefully a whole lot better for them to be able to get that job done.
Awesome. And it's amazing how those little things that you mentioned are those things that really do make the difference between whether
Mhm.
you have a successful business or
Yeah.
not. 'Cause, from my perspective of accounting and finance, I always tell people is like, it's one thing to actually do the work, it's another thing to actually get paid for the work that you have
Yep,
done.
yep. And the solo mediator, I mean, they are a small business, often of one, and so they really are tasked with dealing with all of the stuff that doesn't have anything to do with their legal background, right, and the authority that they bring to that work. And it kind of gets a little bit discounted because the assumption is, well, you're, an attorney, you're going to be able to figure all that stuff out, and so they end up getting sort of handed off these like legacy processes and the way that it's always kind of been done. And it takes a little bit more effort to kind of investigate what tool is going to be right for you. And so for us, we wanted to build something that wasn't a legal platform that mediators can use, something that was specifically built for negotiators for their unique challenges so that adopting the platform and getting on there could be a little bit faster.
Nice, nice. I love it. So, where can people go to find the app
Yeah.
and really check out your website?
Yeah, so we're a web-based platform, and they can visit us at fourthparty.app. There we are on the screen. And so we really want to know what stage you are in your career so that we can provide you with an experience that supports you wherever you find yourself. But again, Fourth Party is that secure solution for negotiators to be able to access their information anytime, anywhere. And so we're really excited about being a security first platform for a field that is highly confidential, and providing them with a tool that can help them get their job done better.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Now, one of the things that I'm curious about is, as you guys think about, your perspective on where the legal landscape is when it comes down to negotiations and mediation, where do you see the future for fourth party?
Yeah, well, we really want to see ourselves as a market leader in the mediation space. So the global conflict resolution sort of market is pretty huge, and there is something like $725 billion spent in legal tech globally every year. So there's a lot of opportunity there, but we want to stay hyper focused on the mediators. So some folks sort of see this as like an entry point and then to expand to a bigger legal space. But mediators are going to be in higher and higher demand because of the justice gap that we find ourselves in the US, particularly around civil matters. Something like 80% of all cases that would have come to bear don't get heard because there just aren't enough attorneys and our courts are overwhelmed. And so, and again, the pandemic has made that even worse. So we're anticipating an influx of new mediators and new neutrals to kind of respond to that court backlog, and they're going to need a really great tool. And so we plan to be there for them when they do transition into the field. And then as attorneys or law students consider a career path for themselves. Mediation hasn't always been something that you go to law school to become. It's kind of like something you do after you've been a lawyer for a while or a judge. But what if there was more demand for this as a career path that you went straight into? And so they're going to need a lot of coaching and process mapping. And so we see ourselves playing a role in that education piece of becoming a mediator and launching your career. And then finally, there's a lot of traction in the legal space just around do it yourself sort of representation and how to get that access and maybe not use an attorney. And so there are some mediators that are working directly with individuals to get their cases resolved. And should that market continue to grow, we want to participate there too.
Nice, nice. I love it. Well, before we wrap up, one question that I really love asking is, as you think about where you've been in your past and you think about where the business is now and
Mhm.
you think about, the trajectory of where you're going,
Mhm.
what's one piece of advice that you would share with other business owners in the legal industry, whether it's on the tech side or whether it's in the actual practice of law?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that early advice that we got around really understanding our customers' pain. So it's really easy to have a great idea and sort of go off to the races on that and continue to confirm your own sort of hypothesis around how great this tool is going to be, but really get invested in having conversations with the people who are actually going to be using it, and have a really thoughtful process around how you collect the feedback. Because it's really easy for us to say, would you use a really awesome tool that solves all of your problems? Everybody's going to say yes, right? But asking them what would motivate them to buy it, or what kind of things inspire them to change their behavior. Those are going to be the nuanced answers that provide you with that guidepost to really get to a solution that people are going to love. And so we're in that right now, but that's going to be something that we're going to always have as a sort of tenet of the company that we're building, that we're hyper invested in that feedback. We want to know what you hate so that we can do something about it.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for being an amazing guest. And
Thank
thank
you.
you, everyone, for watching and listening. Do head over to all the major platforms on LinkedIn, on Facebook, YouTube, as well as all podcast platforms, and definitely subscribe to the show. And special thank you to our sponsors for the show, the TL Turner Group. Until next time, we get it. Keeping track of your finances can seem pretty overwhelming when you're running a business. Achieving your financial goals in business should not be a guessing game. That's why it pays to work with someone that can take a hard look at your financial numbers and not add more stress to the balancing act of running your business. The T.O. Turner Group will provide a clear and concise explanation to your financial standing. The T.O. Turner Group will simplify finance and help you make smarter money decisions in your business.